In this video, we'll be learning how to solve quadratic equations. Quadratic equations are usually represented by an equation that looks like this: ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0, where a is the number in front of x squared, called the coefficient, b is the number in front of x, and c is the constant at the end. We usually want it to equal 0 on one side because then we can use three methods in order to factor. The three methods that we can use to solve an equation are factoring, completing the square, and the quadratic formula. In this video, we'll be discussing all three methods, so make sure you stay until the end so that you understand all three ways in which to solve a quadratic equation. Let's try to solve this quadratic equation in all three ways. So the first way I'm going to choose is to factor. I would need everything to be on the left-hand side in order to factor, and I would need 0 to be on the right-hand side. So if I'm going to factor this, I use my factoring method, which you can see in the link above. If you're unsure how to factor, I've designed a method in which it can be quite easy to factor trinomials. A trinomial is what we have on the left. So I'll take the factors of x squared, which are x and x, and I'll take the factors of 12, which in this case I can choose to be 6 and 2. Why would I choose 6 and 2? Because I need the middle term to be -8. So I know the first two terms of my brackets, because this will be factored into two brackets. The first two terms, if they multiply, will be x and x. The last two terms, when they multiply, need to give me positive 12, 6 and 2. But when I multiply the outer terms and the inner terms, they need to give me -8, -8x. So therefore, if I'm going to do the same multiplication in the little diagram I have below, that would be x times 6 and x times 2. But I know that I need -8. So both of these should be negative, because -6 times -2 still gives me positive 12. And if I do that multiplication, it would be -6x going in this direction, and in this direction it would be -2x. Together adding up to -8, which will be my middle term. So if I had to expand this bracket, these two brackets, I would end up getting exactly what I had above. And that's the factoring method I use. So now that we've factored, let's try find how we're going to solve this equation. Well, if I have two brackets that are multiplying each other, so I have this bracket in orange multiplied by this bracket in green, that means that I have two things that are multiplying each other, and they are both equal to 0. Well, if you've got two things that are multiplying each other and it equals 0, one or both of those things should be equal to 0. That means this bracket should be equal to 0, or this bracket should be equal to 0. So what I can do now is solve for x. So by adding 6 on both sides, I get x is equal to 6, or by adding 2 on both sides, I get x is equal to 2. So I have two answers. X can be equal to 6, or x can be equal to 2. Let's try the next method and see if we can factor using completing the square. If you're enjoying this video, please don't forget to subscribe. The more support I get for the channel, the more videos I can make for you. So let's try complete the square in this example, and that will help us solve the equation. If you're not sure how to complete the square, please check out the video in the link above. That will help you understand why we complete the square in more detail. So when I complete the square, what I'm going to do is focus on the first two terms. This will help me complete the square, and what I'm going to do is give some space to insert something that will help me. So what am I going to put in here in this space that will help me complete the square? Well, I have a special number that I can use that will help me complete the square. And that number will always be b over 2 squared. In this case, b is negative 8 divided by 2 squared will give me negative 4 squared, which is 16. So what I'll do here is add 16, but I cannot just add 16 to an equation unless I do it on the other side. But what I like to do is keep both of the terms on the left, because this works for both equations, which I have now, as well as expressions and functions. So what I tend to do is subtract 16 also. Now the terms that I've inserted have a value of 0. I have not changed the value of my equation. Some people, instead of subtracting 16, add 16 on both sides, which is perfectly fine. But I tend to think that if we subtract 16, we can use it in any form of algebra where we complete the square. So now I've added 16 and subtracted 16. I've added no value to my expression, so everything is still balanced. So what I can do now is group this. If I group that 16 is now included in this grouping, giving me a perfect square bracket. That is the point of completing the square. So what I will, if I can factor this using the same method, I would get two brackets, and the brackets would be x minus 4, x minus 4. That was my goal. And together, these two terms would make minus 4. So what do I have if I can group these brackets together? They are identical brackets, and that becomes x minus 4 squared minus 4. Now I can continue to solve in order to get x alone. So what I'll do is add 4 on both sides, and I have x minus 4 squared equals 4. Now that we have x minus 4 squared equals 4, we just need to take the square root on both sides. And I'd be left with x minus 4 is equal to 2. But it's not just 2. When I take the square root of any number, I actually get two values. I get a positive 2 and a negative 2. Because positive 2 squared is 4 and negative 2 squared is 4. Then I can solve for x by adding 4 on both sides. So what I will have is 4 plus or minus 2. If I want to simplify that, I can say 4 plus 2 is 6, and 4 minus 2 is 2. These are the exact same answers as what I had before. We usually use completing the square when I cannot factor. When the numbers that I get when I factor this tend to be something that's more complicated, and I wouldn't be able to use two brackets. Let's now move to the final way that we can solve quadratic equations, and that's to use the quadratic formula. In the beginning of this video, we discussed the values of a, which is the coefficient of x squared, b, which is the coefficient of x, and c is the constant number at the end. The only way we can use the quadratic formula is if we have it in this format. So a would be equal to 1 in this case, b would be equal to negative 8, and c would be equal to 12. And all of that is equal to 0. We need to have 0 on one side to use the quadratic formula. So what is the quadratic formula? The quadratic formula is represented by x is equal to minus b plus minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac divided by 2a. That is the quadratic formula, and that will give me the answer to any quadratic equation in the whole world. No matter what your quadratic equation is, this will give you the answer to that equation. Now, you might still need to know how to use the other forms or the other methods in case your teacher asks you in a test, solve using factoring or solve using completing the square. So let's learn how to use this. All we need to do now is input the values of a, b, and c. We know that a is 1, that b is -8, and that c is 12. So what we're going to do, and we should always substitute using brackets, we will substitute these numbers into the equation. So I have minus, and then I have a b value, plus minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c divided by 2a. So the b value goes in first. The b value is -8 and -8. The a value goes in next. A is 1, and a is also down here as 1, and the c value is 12. And all I have to do now is put this into my calculator, and you might be asking yourself, why is there a plus and minus? Well, that means that I'm going to have two answers. The first time I put it in the equation, I'll use a plus, and the second time I put it into the equation, I will use a minus, and that will give me two answers, just like I got two answers in the previous two methods. So now let's use a calculator and see. So I start building my equation. My equation will be, in the bracket, minus with a bracket, and inside there will be -8 plus the square root of -8 squared. Remember, the square should be on the outside of the bracket, minus 4 multiplied by a multiplied by c, and that is over 2 multiplied by a, and I get the value of 6. I know that is one of my answers that I got previously. So x is equal to 6. Now I will go back up to the equation, and I will change the plus to a minus, and I'll get x is equal to 2. So I have a value of x is equal to 6, and then I'll go back up and put a negative into the equation where there was a positive, and I'd get the value of x is equal to 2. Those are my two answers that I got in all the other questions using all the other methods. So now you have done the factoring method, the completing the square method, as well as the quadratic formula. If you like this video, please don't forget to subscribe and comment below on what videos you'd like me to do next.